Hello, I am Tash and this is Mike.
Hello.
We are from Engine House Animation Studio. We are based in Cornwall. We do a whole range of animation, so mostly 3D, but across a massive range of projects, massive range of styles. Should we just hop straight into the show reel and give an idea?
Sounds good. It's only short.
Bad wolf has kidnapped the Muffin Man.
Yeah, really was short.
Yeah.
Excellent. Cool. So yeah, I think like Tash was just saying, it's a sort of variety of work, lots of different styles in there. We're a small company based in Cornwall. There's only 4 of us, as well as some freelancers. So we're our approach has been always to look for new ways to do things quickly and creatively. It's the thing of, if you've got 4 hours to cut down a tree, you spend the first 3 hours sharpening your axe and trying to always find that kind of stuff, which enables our team to work on these sort of bigger seeming projects. But a lot of our clients tend to need or require the final thing from us about 4 to 6 weeks from when they first get in touch with usually a pretty, no offense if any of them are listening, but a sort of poopy script that we have to kind of turn into the final thing with not a huge amount of direction. So the kind of the tools we use span from everything from pen and paper and storyboarding and all the way through to final rendering. And we guess we could probably just cover the software side of things now. I mean, we would traditionally use we used to use Studio Max as our kind of main base, and rendering in Redshift or Octane, and always rendering always have been a traditional bottleneck for a kind of small studio pipeline. So we're kind of early adopters of things like GPU rendering. I'll just do a quick screen share.
Yeah, I guess the irony is we're here to talk about real-time animation, but none of the projects in the show reel were actually done in real time. This is a kind of much more recent adoption, but yeah, this is kind of an example of how before we've always been trying to find ways that do make us more efficient and do allow for kind of the focus of our time and the budget to be on the creative, and kind of the sort of more process heavy side is kind of it's automated or it's made quicker, or we've just kind of tried to find the quickest, most efficient approaches to these projects. So yeah,
what's on the screen right now is it's probably in about 2014, 2015 maybe. We had the world's first 8 GPU machine. I think it was running 8 780 Ti cards or something. We ordered 2 of those, which was a fair amount of money, but compared to a company's render farm, this could blitz through everything that we needed. So we had these shipped over from a guy, I think it was in Poland, who put these together. And so this kind of thing, really just trying to get through work efficiently and be able to be small and dynamic enough to use whatever tools come up, and without it sort of being a big overhaul, which kind of leads us nicely into the pandemic, really. Just sort of prior to the pandemic, we'd sort of played with Unreal slightly, especially in sort of VR projects and things, but that was never for a sort of visual reason. It was just a necessity because a job was needed to be in VR or sort of some sort of interactive app. It was usually we were working with a developer who was already using Unreal Engine, so we were somewhat familiar with it, but certainly not in terms of using it for animation, like real-time animation pipeline. And when the pandemic hit, we went on furlough for I think 3 months, during which time we're like, okay, it's time to sit down and get through some of these Unreal tutorials that are out there, and Epic are very good with their tutorials they put online. So we just kind of spent the summer doing that, really, and getting our heads around how it actually works. I mean, there was definitely a few demos at the time, such as like the Fortnite cinematic and the Reflections demo, and rebirth as well, using the Megascan stuff that we thought, sort of unbelievable really that could be done. We hadn't really tweaked at that point quite how much it disrupts the animation pipeline and all of the benefits. We just kind of liked the idea that you didn't really have to wait for renders. Just that in its own was enough. So sort of coming out.
I suppose we'd known it could be a good option, but when someone does come to you with a project and they need something in 6 weeks, that just isn't the time to try a totally new pipeline. And then we took some of the kind of downtime when we were very quiet during the pandemic to sort of trial those things out. But again, until you're kind of hands-on on a project, you don't really know what that means. It's nice. We did a few tests. I don't know if you want to bring up some of those the tests we did.
Oh yeah.
But we tried a few things. We re-rendered little shots that we had that we'd done differently before. And we just sort of played around with it, and I would say kind of think moving that stuff over was a process in itself, but also kind of it gave us kind of slightly different look and feel. But again, you still don't know how much that's going to change the pipeline as a whole. It's just, yes, it still looks nice in there. That's good. Yeah,
this was sort of the test 1, 2, and 3 really was not commercial projects, just ones where projects we'd completed and then we'd sort of just retrofitted them into Unreal to see, well, what would the pipeline be like had we have used Unreal in a kind of downtime. So I mean, you can see even with this character on the right, the one at the bottom was done in Unreal, the one at the top was done in Redshift, and there's sort of pros and cons to each. I mean, I think this was sort of such early days that we hadn't figured out like the tone mapper yet, and some of the subsurface scattering, and some of these things. So there is still quite a difference between the two, but I think whereas this one probably took a good few minutes per frame, this we could just press play and it would render out. This one we sort of chose to do because it was quite stylized, sort of flat shaded and the sort of rim lights and so on, just to see, just kind of A/B test that with the completed project. And this one was more realistic, kind of brute force bounce lighting and so on. So again, just to test how would that work, and we're just kind of blown away really by the fact we could, it really was just press play in the viewport and it would play through in sort of near final quality, which even though on those examples the final image isn't necessarily what we'd want from it, but it was enough to convince us that really this was something we could use in production. And so kind of it was before coming out of the end of the mega grant was before lockdown, wasn't it? I think we put in an application. The application in first year. So we were still are developing some of our own internal projects across film and TV. And Epic Games had a scheme called the Mega Grant Scheme, where you could apply for funding from them to continue developing your ideas, but using Unreal Engine. And we applied with 2 of our projects. And then, it was summer of 2020, they got back to us and actually offered us more money than we'd asked for, which was amazing. And so we then spent the next few months developing some animation tests and other kind of little teasers for pitch decks and things like that within Unreal, which again was just another further step in kind of understanding what that process was like. And I know that something that comes up a lot is kind of visually, is it going to feel like it's a game? Is it going to look like a game? Is it going to have that kind of aesthetic? And so that was kind of something we played with whilst we were developing some of our internal projects. Yeah, I think the mega grant definitely gave us the justification for spending time or doing what we said we'd do and get these sort of projects into Unreal and looking good. But I think the main test, especially when we started to then apply it to our commercial work, was if we ever mentioned it to a client that, we'll actually use Unreal Engine for this project, few of them would really be freaked out that they just expect it's going to look like a game and it's going to look low poly and so on, which it's been a bit of a job convincing them that that's not the case. I think since the Unreal 5 demo, that's less of a thing. But certainly, we always refer to it as sort of orcs and swords look. Like there's lots of games that feature orcs with swords and that kind of, they're in a woodland, and there's a certain look. I think this is kind of true, I guess, of most render engines, that there's not necessarily a real reason for the look of the render. It tends to be the kind of tone mapper it uses and things, but it's almost like certain genres are attracted to different renderers. so it's quite easy to spot something that's done with like Octane or V-Ray or Corona and so on. So with Unreal, there's definitely a look. You can kind of, with that previous image I had up with the two characters, I mean, I can easily spot with the one at the bottom that was done in Unreal Engine, whereas we sort of had to work quite hard sort of since then to sort of get rid of that look, but it's sort of, I think as soon as we knew that it was 100% capable of getting any kind of look we wanted, we were then ready to do what the mega grant was for, which was to convert these teasers into Unreal, which unfortunately we're not able to show. But because we'd finished them and can't show these teasers that we've done, this is where the idea for Wilder came from. So it's my background at the moment. It's still from a short film that we did last spring, summer. And that was really, Tasha, want to talk about the reasoning behind all that?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, there were a few reasons. It was, as we say, we wanted to talk about Unreal and what we were doing with it. Our Twitter was constantly like, oh, this Unreal thing, like you won't believe what we're making, but we can't actually show you any of it. So we wanted to kind of have a piece that sort of really demonstrated why it's great, how we were using it. And it was also, we had some of the mega grant money left. We knew it would be a really nice and enjoyable creative project for us to do as well. And it also, it's in the selection of this festival, and we just knew it was, it's something we could put into the festival circuit and come to events like this and do nice things like this as well.
Yeah, it was exactly. It's supposed to be spending some of that investment from Epic on sort of showing what we could do with it, because the style is also quite unique. It's part of the challenge with that again was, a continuation of, can it do more photorealistic sort of ArchViz type stuff? Like, yeah, it can. And then can it do sort of very flat sort of gamey things? Like, yeah, could it do something that's quite stylized? And so it really kind of pushed that with this, because it was a storybook. I'm just going to do a quick screen share actually, just to sort of bring this all together somewhat. So we're not going to play the short all the way through. I think you can possibly play it on the Animation Dingle site, or it's being screened somewhere, or it's on Vimeo. Wilder with a Y. So this really here, this is within the engine, and it's not, we're kind of looking through the camera there, but this is the whole scene. And as you can see, you can bolt around in real time and move stuff and do whatever really. So move lights, these can all be adjusted. So when you're looking through the camera, you can sort of turn these things on and off, but you can hit play and these sort of fireflies are moving, and at any point you can sort of see what's going on. You could scrub through to the next shot, which is here. There's a bunch of stills, and again sort of coming out of the camera view, you can see a lot of it's very simple. We're only really modeling and doing layout for what's going to be seen. This was an interesting project really, that we didn't have storyboards, because it was based off a book, so we kind of used the pages of the book as to sort of form the storyboard and block it out from there. So as you can see, it's sort of there's a lot going on even in this scene. There's some particles, there's lots of grass, there's all of the sort of area lighting, there's his groom on his beard and hair, which is quite dense, and that's all as it moves. There's the dynamic as well, so it's actually sort of simulating as it goes, so we're not pre-caching anything, which really gives us a kind of ridiculous amount of flexibility when if you're moving a character, you see his beard moving along there as he moves in real time. So there's, and the whole was it 4.5 minutes short is just exactly as you see it here, and you can go into the editor here, and each one of these is a shot. You can go into these and see the stuff that makes up the shot. And like I say, there's all of the tutorials, the way we've learned how to do this, we're just free and online, so it's completely attainable, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think you can immediately see, looking at it from these views, that how creative that allows you to be. It really is all there. You can kind of see it and immediately get that feeling of the scene. You really feel like you're kind of already immersed in the world, which is really nice, which has been really, really great for us. On some of these shots, you can immediately tweak it, you can change things, whereas before you wait for it to render, you wait however many hours for it to render, and then you have it, and there's something in it you hate it, or there's something you wish you could have tweaked, or but the time isn't there anymore, whereas that hands-on is immediately available to you. But also for our clients, I think we're slowly kind of involving them more and more in engine, which I think is a kind of really exciting step for them to kind of really feel like they're involved in it. And we quite frequently work as well with people who are maybe not massively au fait with animation and how that kind of process works. Whereas this is very immediately tangible, and it almost feels a bit more like a live action shoot. And the kind of the steps and the processes make a lot more sense. It feels real, rather than it being, if you compare it to Max or something, it feels quite sterile until you render it and you can kind of see it as the final thing. Whereas this is sort of immediately a living, breathing set, essentially, that you can kind of be inside.
Exactly. And we've got a funky little diagram in a minute to sort of show where that sits in the pipeline. And it's just kind of occurred to me really that one of the challenges we set ourselves with Wilder was that the final thing plays in the editor. So that the text you saw at the start was done with sort of masks and materials. Would have been, to be honest, way easier to do that in After Effects or in Maya or Max or something. But I think tying our hands behind our backs with that for this project really helped us to learn a lot of good practice stuff. But the cool thing with real-time rendering as well is you can apply basically all of your post-processing as well. So that's sort of tone mapping, color grading. You can even do localized sort of color grading in here, which we didn't do on this, but depth of field, motion blur, it's all kind of happening as you see it. And I mean, if I just toggle off the post-processing for now, you can see the main difference is, I don't know how it will appear on the screen, but is this kind of hatching. We've got the sort of static hatching on the walls and sort of static objects. And then if I zoom in, it might not be too visible at this resolution, but there's a sort of general jittery updating, which is, it's just a kind of flat panning, sketchy texture that's multiplied against the ambient occlusion pass, and giving that some parameters to tweak so we can set how the distance from it. But all of this stuff, ordinarily we'd render this scene once, then we'd have to render the ambient occlusion and maybe apply the sketchy look in something like After Effects or Nuke, and then multiply that over the footage. At which point, if we thought, God damn it, I've noticed that the potato wedges are floating off the table, we'd have to kind of put those down, render it each again, both passes, bring it into post, do all this. Whereas here, we're still kind of training ourselves to not be stressed if we spot a problem, or if we think, oh, wouldn't it be nice if this soup was bubbling. It kind of just means spend a few minutes working on this, and then all of a sudden you can press play and it will just carry on as it was. So it's a real mind shift. I mean, if there's people who are listening who want to make the leap to it, there's a sort of, it is a big mental leap to sort of, I don't know, just wrap your head around the benefits of that. But if you're starting out with this stuff, maybe it'll feel more second nature, but it is still kind of mind-blowing, really. So
it's funny when we look back on projects, as we said, we've done a lot of really quick turnaround things, and there are a few projects that at the time it felt like it was, of course, this is how you do it, and this totally makes sense, and it's a good process that we've got. And we felt like, particularly for the time, we had a really sort of sensible and efficient pipeline. Whereas, knowing what we know now, we've just finished a 5-week super quick turnaround for 60 seconds advert with, I think, probably like 10 or 12 characters, and loads of different shots, lots of different environments. And we just kind of kept saying, imagine if we were having to render that, it would have been, all of your nights would have been clicking turn off renders, and kind of coming in on the next morning and just hoping that it's worked out and it looks good and you're happy with it all and there's nothing that you wanted to tweak. Whereas in this, it was, we could be creative on it every single day, we could make changes on it every single day, and there's a big conversation about how much cheaper and quicker real-time engines make projects. And it definitely does, but I think there's also a bigger argument for just how much more you can be in control, how much more you can be creative, how much more you can collaborate with other people. So it offers more than it being cheaper and quicker. I think there's a kind of bigger bonus that comes with it, as
Definitely.
well as.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for that job, there was those 6 weeks, I mean, we could say, oh, it's okay, we could deliver the same quality, but in 4 weeks, you know, as we might have done previously. It's sort of usually better to still use up the 6 weeks, still use up that time. You just have longer in the kind of creative process. So yeah, we've got probably makes sense to probably not the pipeline image, kind of going a bit rogue from our plan. But so yeah, it's just a little diagram of the sort of the previous. So this was you know, there's no writing on here. It's really just the orange is it's supposed to represent the rendering hub, you know, and where all your 3D assets and lighting comes in, and all these other nodes can be anything else. So you typically start with storyboarding or a script, and sort of go into a kind of an animatic and a previs, and you know, creating some assets which feeds into, you know, rigging, and it sort of all ends up, you sort of render about somewhere near the end, and then, you know, then the final stage will probably be post and audio, and it's sort of the stress becomes most apparent when either from ourselves or from a client say, oh, actually, with this character that's way back up here, can we, I know it's been signed off, but we actually really need this now, or I've spotted this mistake with it. You still have to go through most of these things to get to here, and then carry on with it before you get the final image, which that obviously takes time, costs money. Was the real-time rendering pipeline is this much more centralized. You could have way more spurs than this, but it's sort of everything is still feeding back into one place. And it's all referenced, if anyone's sort of familiar with like referencing in Maya, it's kind of like that really, that you could update. So back in the Unreal viewport you just saw with Wilder, if we changed the groom, or we changed the character, we changed the texture, we could just right click, you know, re-import the same file, and you just carry on it as you were, and everything sort of feeds into this place. You've really tried to stay in there as much as you can. And I think we'll sort of get to in a minute sort of where we see the sort of future of where that's headed, but it's sort of, you have a lot more flexibility once you stay within that kind of mindset. Just put up my notes a second, so where we're at.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, like we were saying, that, you know, having even if it is a quick turnaround, a sort of 6-week project, the fact that either yourselves internally or a client might not be able to actually see how it's going to look until week 4 or 5 is kind of quite risky, and you've really got to hope that you don't get to that point and kind of hate how it looks, or feels like it's not quite right for the project or for the brand, or however it needs to sort of look and feel, whereas this is so much more immediate. And I think just that sort of gratification of having a really tangible thing much earlier, it's just good for the whole process.
Yeah.
And sets you up knowing that you're moving in the right direction.
And certainly the creative process is such a huge part of that. So I mean, the you know, skipping ahead, I suppose, to where what we think will be next with the real-time rendering is I presume that the obvious ones will be faster. I mean, there's a kind of point to be made really about, you know, when we say it kind of renders in the viewport in real time, like it does, and you know, as you've seen, you know, it's not rendering in 4K in the viewport, and it's not got sort of final render settings. There's sort of less shadow samples and so on, but it's, for all intents and purposes, it's like a sort of half-res preview, I suppose, in real time. So when you come to render the final sequences out of Unreal, I can't remember, to be honest, how long Wilder took to render, but it was probably 2 hours for it might have been less, it could have been an hour, but it's so negligible really that, you know, that could have been one shot before, or one pass of one shot over multiple machines. So this is one machine running with one graphics card, sort of rendering the whole thing on final settings. But it's just sort of important to point out that it's not, you're not sort of getting your final sort of 4K frames at in real time. So I guess in terms of where things are heading in the future, as graphics cards gets faster and things like Unreal 5 come into play, that it probably will be moving more and more into that, and being able to do more particles, more, you know, stuff sort of visually. But I think more than that, there'll be back to this idea of this sort of spoke pipeline, that there's more that can be done in the engine. So I know they've got things like control rig and to be able to do animation within the engine, and
things like, is it called Praxinos? Is that what it's called? So you can there's the thing where you can be doing storyboarding directly into the engine as well. And probably worth noting, in the kind of post-pandemic world, I'm clearly just here in my spare room, we're still all at home, but kind of in terms of a remote pipeline, it's really effective. I'm not going to be the person who starts talking about peripherals and things like that, but it's a really sort of sensible and clear system for several people to be working on the same project at the same time, and that kind of ease of collaboration across a project's really good. And I know that there's ways in the way you can kind of split it into various departments, and kind of lighting people can come in and change lighting, and animation people can come in and change. And there's sort of very kind of, again, I don't know why I've started talking about this. There are very clever ways where you can kind of collaborate on those things, and kind of change what you need to change whilst maintaining other parts for other people. And I think in a kind of, this kind of hyper modern structure of, everyone can work remotely and it's still the same. It almost feels the same as if you're in the same room. There's still that kind of ability to have that collaboration.
You're the only one of us who's mentioned peripherals so far, so
yeah,
I think if anyone has any peripherals related questions, feel free to fire them to Tash. Actually have a question there. Did you find any limitations with the hardware you were using, and if you did, how are they overcome? Yeah, so the main thing with that is the hardware limitations is what graphics card you've got, and I think probably the biggest one is VRAM, the amount of RAM you've got on a GPU. For Wilder, we were using RTX 2080 Ti on each of our machines. I think possibly Jason had a 3060, but we're kind of pushing some of the scenes where you'd run out of RAM, and Unreal simply just closes down and gives up. So upgrading that is going to be the next thing, I guess. Yeah, so I kind of got distracted by the questions, but yeah, I guess we'll just finish up our sort of thing. So I guess
challenges in achieving the style look. I've just brought up, Mike, I think it might be worth showing the modeling technique, just to sort of show exactly how that was sort of created. So obviously we were working directly from a clearly hand illustrated children's book. We wanted to kind of maintain that look, whilst also, I think if you're going to turn something into 3D, there has to be a reason. So you want to kind of maintain the original integrity of what you're basing it on, but still kind of bring things to life. So I think, the hair, the lighting are kind of things that were much more realistic, that kind of brought a new layer to it. But we still really wanted to maintain this kind of illustrated feel. So
yeah, I'll just do a quick screen share of that, because that's a good shout. Oh, you've done it.
Yeah.
Nice.
So you can see that it's literally the page of the book that's kind of being pulled out and sort of modeled around.
Yeah, we sort of literally used was quite fortunate in a way that some of the images from the book were very flat, sort of orthographic view from the front. So we didn't need to distort it to match, and it sort of had a lot of this detail. So kind of even using the same image as a displacement map worked quite well, just to add a bit of detail to the model and a bit of variation and things. So yeah, I think probably about the first week of working on it was just in one scene, just really simply. It was the shot I've got in my background with the aurora going on. It was just a proof of concept, I guess, internally, and to sort of the art direction, that how close are we going to get to the book, because the book obviously doesn't look 3D, it's very flat. The tent is a good example of this. Tash, is your wheelhouse.
Yeah, my big creative input to this project. But obviously in children's books, the way often items are drawn is kind of from a sort of multi perspective. So the tent, you're both seeing the side and the front, and that gives it that hand-drawn feel. Whereas Mike was modeling the tent and obviously modeled it like you would a tent, and kind of made it true to life. I think kind of by bringing the door of the tent round, you kind of give it that feeling of it's been hand drawn, because you're kind of seeing this multi perspective.
Yeah, it's really just sort of skewed camera facing, isn't it? It's so you get that kind of flatness to it, that it has that feel. So I'll stop sharing that.
And again, if we'd have, rendered that shot and I'd have looked at it and said that, Mike, you probably would have gone like, oh, I don't know, maybe we'll put it on a list, and if we get time, we'll look at it. Whereas it was, 5 minutes later, it was done, we were looking at it and it looked great.
We would fudge it in post.
Yeah.
Exactly that. Yeah, so I guess the last, before that, we've got a couple more questions, haven't we? But the last thing we were just going to mention was just how our clients feel about it now, because they
yes. Yeah, so our most recent project, one was mentioned earlier. Yes, this was a kind of 5-week turnaround, and sort of because of the nature of real time, we were able to sort of give them some kind of teasers early doors, which they were happy with, which meant that then we just had the freedom to run straight into animation, really heads down, kind of not worrying about needing to show them updates, because they'd seen it, they knew how it was going to look and feel, because we could show that to them really early. So when we delivered the project, we were confident that they would be happy with it, and luckily, as that testimonial shows, they were.
Yeah, keep an eye on our, I guess, like Twitter or Instagram or something, and in the coming weeks we'll shove that online when it's done. There's also a production blog, isn't there, of Wilder, with some more like stuff like that, modeling technique and things in there.
Yeah, there's a kind of week by week breakdown of just how we kind of got through the project, just to show how quickly things kind of came together.
Yeah, so to answer the question around did Unreal help or hinder the creativity and experimentation, it absolutely helped, because everything was in one place. So we ended up so much that the look development was done there, and just immediately be able to see results. It's kind of like suits how I like to work anyway, which is you just throw stuff at it, you get kind of happy accidents, you quickly rule out things that don't work, that do work, and you can, it just sort of, and it's ever evolving. So that's it absolutely sort of helped with that. What features would we really like to see in the future in Unreal? I think they're doing this already, but I think more sort of team collaboration sort of tools. I think they're bringing more of that in Unreal 5, just so that we can all get into the same space virtually and be able to see the same thing, especially for remote working. I think would be ace. And then I guess, sort of more animation tools, more I think sort of, I don't think this is on the cards, but sort of more access to the lighting buffers. I think, again, with these sort of stylized looks, it's quite difficult sometimes to access. The sort of the lighting's done at this sort of stage of the rendering process that you can't really sort of access it in, say, like materials, or say I want this material to be this way if it's lit up, or to even play with the render passes individually as you go. So something like that would be quite good. I know they're bringing in more compositing stuff, so possibly. Right, how is the relationship with the companies behind the engines? Don't know if that means sort of our relationship, but
yeah, if it's with the guys at Epic, we can't really kind of rave about them more. They've been really helpful, really supportive since getting the mega grant. Obviously that was great. Funding is always really helpful, but as well, just sort of in general support, they've made us kind of lots of really great introductions to other companies who are kind of looking to work in this way, and we're hopefully going to be doing kind of more events, things like this, kind of talking, doing more demos, because as well, we're just, we're massively blown away with sort of how useful real-time engine is, but also we're aware that it already quite neatly fits into our pipeline, because we'd already been working in quite a autonomous way that was, very different to the way a Soho studio might operate, because there's 300 people and you can't kind of have a more flexible pipeline. So we're kind of keen to talk about that more as well. So they're kind of really good and giving those opportunities.
I think the next question as well sort of ties in with that, which is, did optimization and tech battle with creative time? And I think what's really cool about this for us is that I think the games industry, I mean, they've obviously used game engines the whole time, but doing it for, they're all about optimization and sort of efficiency, especially for mobile games. But really, it's such a key part of it. Whereas for 3D animation, it's really not. We're kind of in general as an industry, I think, pretty lazy with disk space and RAM and rendering, and you can just sort of chuck more stuff at it, chuck everything at it, more bounces, and it will sort of, these days it will still render out in a reasonable enough time if you've got a big enough render farm or you use online sort of cloud rendering. But what that does is it sort of makes you lazy, I think, in terms of properly kind of organizing your files, making sure that they're actually already kind of clean and neat. And so I think in terms of optimization for us, we didn't do any as we went, because in a game you couldn't have a frame take a second to render.
Yeah.
You need to be getting through 60 frames a second, and so if we get a frame once every second, it's such a huge shift from waiting minutes per node and things. So we could probably optimize it down and get that faster, but really, we don't need to. So the main, I would sort of say it's a limitation, but not really. It's just that we have to be kind of super organized at the front end. I think there's way more work that goes into asset creation for a real-time pipeline than there is otherwise. If stuff's not properly named, if it's not properly referenced, it just becomes a mess. And just clean meshes and clean textures, clean UVs, it's kind of good practice that I think can sometimes fall by the wayside. But so we didn't spend a lot of time optimizing anything really.
So do you think that Unreal will replace software like Maya as the industry standard in the future?
No, because, well, don't know how far in the future, but I think I know Unreal are bringing in some sort of modeling tools and sculpting tools and things, but I think they're going to be pretty basic. And while things like Maya and particularly Blender seems to be pretty well set up for asset creation and things. I think like Houdini as well, they've got to bring in ways of bringing in particles and stuff. So I think, again, thinking of it more that the software will be around, these kind of peripheral things that feed into it. And because they're sort of specialist and bespoke, I can't imagine that Unreal's ever going to have the best UV unwrapper or retopo tools or sculpting. It just, there are the right tools for the right job. So I don't think it will replace them, certainly not for a long time. And then how do you
it's a good one to end on. How do you top welder next? Fingers crossed. We've got lots of projects in the pipeline at the moment, kind of internal, and like we were saying, we've got quite a few climate projects recently that have been super fun to work on. And hopefully it's kind of, we keep learning more about it. On this most recent project, we learned a lot of things that we hadn't known when we were making Wilder. So I think the more you use these things, the more that technology develops, the more we're kind of understanding how it works. Hopefully we can just kind of keep building on it.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of end that one with a sales pitch of, I think the ideal for us would be with, one of our internal projects, which is got a feature film and a series that's sort of aimed at young adult audience. I think to do sort of push this kind of stylized look even further, and to do that on a sort of longer form, either series or film. So, if anybody has too much money and just wants to see that get done in Unreal, we're here.
We could do that.
Yeah, that's how we'd top it. But yeah, that's probably about everything, unless there's any other questions. I think they're perfect.
So yeah, cool. Thank you very much. That's a little whistle stop tour of real time.